Welcome to episode 5 of the Expert Cruise Show. I'm Anthony, and he's Chris. Well, you could be Chris, and I can be Anthony, or we could switch one day, and then I can be the maritime historian. That would be great. And I think that's we should remind you, in case you haven't caught up with episodes 1 through 4, Chris is a maritime historian who lectures on the ship and has written, is it 18 books?
18
books.
Yes, yeah. The newest one's just been published,
right.
So it's
very
exciting.
And I've been a travel journalist for a long time, but I also have a relationship with Cunard, mainly having done all 4 maiden crossings of the Cunard Queens. We're not just fanatics, but we are in love with being at sea, which is why we chose to do this podcast with this view of the ocean, because I don't know about you, Chris, but I could just stare out at that forever.
That's why I still think that every single cruise ship that's built should have a promenade deck, because if you can't get out into the open and just watch the ocean without being sold anything, then that's not the right kind of cruise ship. If you're interested in finding out why we thought that, you should go and check out some of those back episodes now, which are both on the podcast platforms but also here on the channel. Exactly
that. And that's the thing, cruising is so uniquely personal. And depending on who you are, you got to find the ship that suits you, or find the cruise line that suits you first. Then you find the ship that suits you. And sometimes it's nice to mix it up. And when the lines bring out a new ship, then obviously it's kind of fun to try the new ship. Although never try it in the first 6 months. That's probably good advice, isn't it? We call it shakedown, right? That ship is just getting itself together. And I remember when I was on the maiden crossing of Queen Anne, well, that happened about 6 months after the ship previewed, and people were complaining. I was watching people's vlogs, and Carol and Paul and all these people were on this ship, and they were moaning about how the food service was so slow. And it's like, and the other problem with booking like an inaugural cruise is that it's expensive. Like, they hike the price up for it,
Yeah, I was on Queen Anne as a guest speaker, but before the actual maiden voyage, 2 days before, they had this sort of preview experience for journalists and media and travel writers and also travel agents. So I flew in actually from Australia and landed on the day that this was taking place. Went straight from Heathrow by transfer all the way down to Southampton, and then just strolled onto the ship. And it was in the middle of this the event had already happened, but the people were allowed to stay on the ship and explore the ship and stay overnight. And there was dinner service happening, and I just boarded straight from Australia and bumped straight into Paul from Paul and Carol. He was literally walking through the lobby, and I'm like, I know you from his videos. I've never met in person, but because I had been at the shipyard on board Queen Anne as she was being built. So I've done some videos from that maiden voyage, but it was all just wow for me, because I'd seen it bare metal and now I'm seeing it finished.
Yes,
which is an interesting perspective, but it's quite different from the perspective of some channels like Paul and Carol, who are looking at the product and analyzing it, which is why the two of us are such big fans of the cruise vlogging community, because you get so many different perspectives of the different ships from different personalities, and people have different things that they find important when it comes to booking a cruise. But Anthony, when I was in the shipyard with Queen Anne, across from us, very much incomplete, but across from us was one of the Prima Class cruise ships being built. Just the hull at that stage, which is one of the latest in the Norwegian Cruise Line fleet, which sort of brings us to what will most likely be the theme of today's conversation, because there are 300 cruise ships out there. There's major cruise brands and major cruise operators. So we've got Carnival Corporation in terms of size. They're the largest one. Then there's Royal Caribbean. Then there's MSC, actually is number 3. But number 4 in terms of fleet size is your Norwegian Cruise Line. And so many people have fond memories and interesting memories of Norwegian Cruise Line. So we thought we'd follow their story today.
The great thing about NCL is that it's a kind of come as you are format. If you want to bring family, bring family. If you want to bring kids, bring kids. If you want to just have an adult romantic getaway, the ship kind of offers you that as well. And that's the thing I love about NCL. And my most recent NCL trip was on the Norwegian Bliss, which was a ship that was built in 2018. And it's it's absolutely beautiful ship. What class of ship would you call the Bliss? Because they've got...
This is a breakaway class.
Breakaway class, right.
And what's really quite interesting about the NCL fleet, the NCL ship design, which it's quite well known for, it's quite a unique to NCL design, at least up to the Prima Class. They can trace a lot of their story back to an acquisition that happened in the year 2000 when actually NCL was purchased by Star Cruises, if you can believe it, which was part of Genting. Of course, during the pandemic, that brand and that company went through a lot of trouble, but they had the Leo class, which was 2 ships that were being run by Star Cruises, and they had a whole heap of orders for cruise ships with Meyer Werft shipyard in Germany, who had built the Leo class as well. And when they acquired NCL needed new tonnage, and so they actually transferred a lot of these ships over and created the Dawn class, which is the groundwork for what became the NCL style of ships. And it was in that period of time that they really started to differentiate themselves as the brand that offered freestyle cruising, which of course now is widespread across all the different brands. But I remember at the time, the advertising back in the early 2000s of you can go to any of the 17 restaurants on board and do whatever you want at any time. It seemed so revolutionary back when it was first announced.
We often talk about how we prefer ships that have a lot of windows and face out. And I wouldn't say that this kind of breakaway class particularly does that. I think these were ordered, some of these ships were ordered back in 2013, 2014, and so it was before people had started moaning on the vlogs about wishing there was a view out, and and I think
there are 6 of them in the breakaway class,
right.
And as you say, the first one, Norwegian breakaway, because quite often the class leader is the ship that the class is named after. Not always. There's some pretty big exceptions. But they built them from 2013 all the way through to 2019.
Right.
And in that time, we see this digital revolution, this vlogging revolution. Everybody's able to give their feedback, and so you do start to see in the new classes that are coming out a change in that architecture that brings the outside in a little bit more. This one's, from that older era, I suppose.
I sometimes think that it was the vloggers Ben and David who were responsible for the design of the Icon class after their criticism of Oasis and other royal ships where you couldn't really see out. So
sure.
There is and I just wanted to mention, you said you bumped straight into Paul of Paul and Carol. Yeah. I bumped into somebody who I've been watching for years, and I was so starstruck I could barely speak. It was Danny from Hard Travel, who is this guy who walks around all the, does these tours because he runs the Hard Travel agency, and he does these great tours of the ship and the rooms. And I bumped into him in the elevator on a ship he was in filming early, and I just was so starstruck. It was like meeting like one of my favorite kind of iconic movie stars, and so because I've only ever seen him on my huge TV in the living room watching YouTube. It's so funny how it is these days.
It's such a nice community, actually. The cruising community is, for the most part, very, very supportive. Yeah. And even also the ocean liner community as well. So I've been fortunate enough to travel on the Queen Mary 2 with Mike Brady from Ocean Liner Designs. He was also there. An absolutely fantastic YouTube channel. And he's read my books, and I watch his channel, and we just got on like a house on fire. And then we also had a wonderful event on board with Carnival cruise ships when they were renaming them in Australia, the P&O ships that transferred across. And at that event, there's all of the different cruise vloggers from my part of the world. So I got to meet Amy from Cruise Crazed Fam. I got to meet Adrian from the Cruise and Travel Guy, and now we're all buddies. And it's just so nice to have, for the most part, the cruising community is very supportive. Obviously Emma and Gary Bembridge as well, like just very
well. There's enough room for everybody, and the reason I say that is because YouTube is viewed by like 8 billion people. So, there's enough views to go round. And it's also part of the reason why we decided to do this format, even though we're traveling a lot, that rather than take the cameras on the trips and be vlogging, in public areas, that to actually kind of have this environment where we can just talk and make it the type of conversations that you probably have with your cruise friends too, because you and I, we're ship nuts, but we're cruise buddies, and we can just talk about it for hours. And so
it's so true.
Why not put that out? And so let's get back to Norwegian and NCL, because my experience of the Bliss was such a positive one. Everything from if we start with the cabin, I had a standard balcony cabin, and the rooms on NCL, these breakaway class ships, we'll talk about the Prima and the Viva a little bit later, but these breakaway class ships, they kind of have quite long, thin rooms, don't they? So you get quite a lot of length, but you don't get so much width. But they kind of get round this by having like a little zigzag in the middle of the room. It's very interesting, the design. It had a lovely long kind of pull-out couch that didn't need to be pulled out. And the bathrooms are small but kind of nice and functional. I do feel like it feels like an upscale experience on all Norwegian ships. It's not like going on Holland America, where a lot of the older ships, the Eurodam and the Koningsdam, they just feel a little bit like, I don't want them to take this the wrong way, but I quite like watching vlogs of people that travel on container ships and they get quite kind of utilitarian, rudimentary cabins. And I sometimes feel that Holland America and some other lines, they are a little bit like that.
So the breakaway class is, I guess, its origins, its DNA, as I mentioned, links back to the Jewel class, which links back to the Dawn class, which links back to the Leo. And the only ship from NCL that's from the Leo class is the Norwegian Spirit, and she was Superstar Leo when she first entered service. Right. Her sister ship was Superstar Virgo, and the two were built for Star Cruisers. Now, when Star Cruisers acquired NCL, after committing to new ships, one of the things they did is they brought some of the older NCL ships into the Asian market and rebadged them as Star Cruisers. And in exchange for that, Leo was sent across to NCL to become Norwegian Spirit. Norwegian Spirit's the NCL ship that I was most recently on board, and obviously has had that massive refurbishment that we talked about. So it's a bit of an outlier amongst the fleet because so much was spent on her. But when you're describing the cabins in terms of their longer, narrow design, I can absolutely relate, because that's the same on board Norwegian Spirit. All of the ships from that era were being built for Star Cruisers that ended up sailing with NCL. They were all built at the German shipyards, and there is actually a difference when you travel a lot, and I'm sure you've noticed it as well. But you can tell the difference in the way that the ships are constructed between the ships that are built in Germany, particularly in the Meyer-Werft yards, or in Cantieri, as opposed to the ones that are built in, Chantier de l'Atlantique in France. They've just got little nuances about the designs, and one of the things that I think that really plays into the benefit of the NCL fleet of ships that were built in Germany is their the layout of that bathroom entrance area that is very much able to be easily upgraded and modified. So you do find that they keep them to that higher class, and particularly on Norwegian Spirit, completely stripped out and rebuilt. Right, yeah. The space was small, but it was so functional that it just worked so well, and it made you feel like the ship was 20 years newer than what she was. I don't know how it was laid out before, but it felt very modern. It felt very much like they'd used that to work it out during the refit to make it work better in terms of the space you had, because cruise ship bathrooms in standard cabins are not known for their space. People,
we've all got a little fatter over the years. I mean, that's the other thing is that, it's
a lot of cruise food.
A lot of cruise food, but just genetically, I think that people are bigger than they were 30 years ago. And I notice that sometimes, like when the toilet, like if you're sitting on the toilet and your knees are pressed up against the shower, it's like they need to make allowances to have the space. And in fact, one of my favorite vloggers, who is on the larger size, one of the first things he does is goes to try out the toilet to see if there's actually room for him to sit on it. But I was thinking the other day, because obviously in last week's episode I was on board the Celebrity Edge, and we were talking about how I didn't think it was really necessary to be in the retreat. And there was a thought that I had, and I don't know whether you feel this too, but I kind of have to like make it work in a smaller space because I want to feel like I'm on a ship. I don't want to feel like I'm on a hotel on land. So there's something quaint and nautical and kind of maritime-y that just makes me feel like I'm at sea and I'm having to manage in a smaller bathroom and share it with my partner and just be a little bit more thoughtful about packing and responsible. Because I love going to sea. I love being at sea. And I think that, I mean, that's not an excuse for wanting to, have a cheaper cabin, but there is some truth to it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've had so much experience with traveling in smaller rooms as well, because when you, I mean, I don't know, people think it's such a glamorous job being a guest speaker on board the cruise ships, and it's wonderful, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love it, particularly the moments that you're standing on stage, but you depending on the line, you don't really get the best in terms of the accommodation, so it's generally the smaller rooms. And prior to that, when we used to travel sort of in our early 20s on the QE2, it was whatever was the cheapest room available just to get on the ship. And so it does feel very much like a ship experience when you're in a smaller room to me, because that's basically what my experience up to this point has been. That being said, I'm going to just derail the conversation for a moment. But when I did my first ever lecture gig on QE2 in 2008. Now, having travelled on the ship many times and nearly always been in an inside cabin on deck 5, the lowest part of the ship, the guest speakers on QE2 were given a Coronia first class room, and we had
those were the days.
We had gold leaf ceilings and huge portholes and a bath, and it was unbelievable. I just couldn't believe that the guest entertainers were getting such amazing accommodation. Of course, having no idea of what it was like out there, I expected at the moment that must be what it's like everywhere. And then, of course, we board the next one after QE2 retired, and it's an entertainment department cabin at the front of the ship under the foghorn that makes a terrible noise in the middle of the night when we're going through fog. And you're like, this is not the same thing. But it does definitely feel very, I mean, I think a porthole just feels more shippy than a window, to be honest.
100%.
In fact, Norwegian Spirit, because she's built in 97, she has portholes on the lowest passenger deck. And interestingly enough, now you might remember this from when you go on Queen Mary, but also QE2 days, but the lowest accommodation deck on Norwegian Spirit also has the watertight doors that would close off the deck when the ship goes in and out of port. And what's really interesting there is that they've completely redone the interior, so the corridors have all been redone. And then there's these watertight door mechanisms, which are from 1997. And the way they've sort of blended the old style surroundings of that watertight door mechanics with the modern part of the ship, and you're sort of standing there and you're kind of in this zigzag sort of design that looks like it's a hotel from maybe a couple of years ago, and you get to the watertight doors and you can see like the label there and the door number and the manufacturing date, and you're like, oh wow, I really remember now that this ship is approaching, kind of that vintage cruise ship feel, which is quite interesting.
We forget that these ships do have compartments, and if we go back to Titanic, of course, famously 3 and then 4 compartments flooded, and it could only stay afloat with 3, I think, flooded. Is that right?
It was 4 that it could stay afloat with.
Right.
There was damage in the bow, and I think the thing that sealed her fate was that the 5th and then slightly into the 6th, the second boiler room, boiler room number 5. It had a very small gash in what was the coal bunker, and there's just that was not survivable at all for that ship's design. But there's improved a lot since then in terms of the way that the compartments are designed. I'm
a little obsessed with the Costa Concordia story as well, considering that, that is a modern ship. Was that a Vista class ship? I can't remember.
No, so it was actually a Concordia class, which is a derivative from the Destiny class. So it's sort of that shared with Costa, because Carnival Corporation owns both. Yeah. And slightly upscaled for Concordia.
That is a modern cruise ship that literally flipped on its side, multiple fatalities, a total disaster, an impossible recovery. Again, they were too far from the shore. They had to send the helicopters in. The reality that things can go wrong. And so watertight doors and compartments, they're as important now as they were in 1912. And also when the Concordia capsized and it's this.
And look, I mean, people don't necessarily think about the watertight doors the way they did back in the day, because quite often you'll find now, like on an older ship, the lowest passenger deck was quite low to the waterline. Nowadays, the cruise ships, you'll notice when you're on board, quite often start on deck 2 or deck 3 sometimes. And we're 17 decks because we're deck 3 to deck 7. Yeah. But it's actually more than that, because the lower areas are the crew accommodation.
Right.
So they will see the watertight doors, which get closed when the ship comes into port, where it gets closed in areas where the ship is sailing when there might be any risk or any hazard to the ship. So you don't see it so much anymore, but it's still there. It's just you don't get to go to that part of the ship.
Is there anything better than peeking in to a crew area when you're walking along a passenger corridor where they've left the door open to the stairwell and the lift, and you look in and it looks like a hospital in there, right? It's all grills and painted white and air conditioning, totally ducting different. That's exposed. And it reminds you that you really are on a vessel, on a maritime vessel, and not necessarily a 5-star hotel. And that's one of my favorite things. I've never had the desire to spend as much money as they ask for the behind-the-scenes tour.
No.
It's always at least $150, $250 for a behind-the-scenes tour. That thing should be free, it really should, especially for those of us that love the ships. But I've noticed people are starting to put those tours on YouTube now. They're recording them surreptitiously. Save yourself the cost,
the money.
But it really is so interesting getting a sense of that kind of upstairs downstairs thing, and how like the engineering department really is very industrial, and yet the passenger areas are so luxurious. And I noticed that when you did your shipyard tour of Queen Anne before she was finished, and I'm looking at these areas that you're touring and you're saying, now this is the spa, and I'm thinking, it doesn't look anything like a spa. It literally looks like a huge kind of empty steel framed space, and how is this ever going to change? And yet in the final days of that fit out, it all comes together. It really is. That's the thing. Magical.
I found so amazing, because I was in the shipyard in October 2023.
Yeah.
Right? And you're walking through the ship, and there is just metal and cables and wires and pipes and what I found fascinating about the whole design of the way they put that ship together is that there would be one area on the corridor where the cabin was in and the door was sealed and it was like ready for its inspection. And then the next one would be completely empty. And then the next one would not even have the front door frame on it. And then the next one would be finished. It seemed as if there was absolutely no logic to the way that was being done. Obviously there was, but from an observer who's just there, it's like on day 1, the funnel's there, but there's no whistles. On day 2, the whistles are there. Just little things that you start to notice. But I'm thinking to myself, obviously it's because I'd never been on a ship at this stage of construction before, but like, how is this going to be ready in May 2024? And yet it was. And they just at the last
because
minute.
So much of it is done off site. And it's just brought on. And it's I don't know if people realize, but the cabins are built off-site and are just forklifted on and slotted in. And then they slide them to the end of the corridor and slot them in. And somehow they manage to fit the window, and then they kind of seal it up. I don't quite know how that works.
Yeah, so like that was the overarching sort of feeling on Norwegian Spirit was that blend, and I suppose we could have a whole episode one day on refurbishments, but that blend of the older style platform that had those elements that you were talking about, that even ships built in the 2020s or 2010s rather, they still featured, but with that modern interior, made the ship feel really special. It was a very special feeling on board, which it's kind of perfect,
isn't it? Because last week we were talking about Edge Class being the perfect ship, but it doesn't have a wraparound promenade deck.
Exactly.
But to counter that, it has this really brilliant kind of jogging track, that has a rake to it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
There probably is no perfect cruise ship, I must say.
Well,
the
thing is,
almost perfect.
you want shelter when you're on the promenade deck. You don't want to be exposed to the elements so much. So it's 6 of one, half dozen the other. But that's why the old ships that have been refurbished are sometimes better. As I go on the Navigator of the Seas quite a lot with the kids. And that ship was fully refurbished in 2019. And, with water slides and lime and coconut design, that kind of real Caribbean design on the decks and stuff, and a whole new layout for the buffet. And it's fantastic. It's such a fantastic, I'd say for families like that class of ship, the Navigator, which is, remind me of the class of that, because there's 4 of those now, isn't there? That would be the
Radiance class.
Radiance class.
Radiance class. I got there
points.
in the end.
Very good. But
I just did a video about it the other day.
But going back to the Bliss, I have to tell you, NCL give you so many options for places to dine, and I just want to kind of list some of them. So the local bar and grill is like the pub, where they do like a Reuben sandwich or fish and chips and stuff like that.
There's a good burger there too.
Fantastic, right? They have an American diner, which for some reason kind of looks, I think that the American diner was like a paid extra, and then it wasn't doing any business. So that in recent months they've actually made it complimentary. Yeah. And that's like a proper 50s style diner at the back of the ship, like below the Speedway. And then you've got this garden cafe with, indoor buffet, breakfast, lunch and dinner. Again, they've tried to modernize the design, make it really interesting. And then they have 3 main dining rooms. So again, splitting them up, making them smaller. Savor and Taste sit either side of each other on deck 6. And they're basically the same, kind of in reverse, but they've changed the color scheming of the chairs and the carpets and just the to make it feel a little special. And then the main dining room, the one that I thought was the most beautiful of the dining rooms, is the Manhattan room. That is where you get the view out the back of the ship. And, I didn't think the food was great in the main dining rooms on that ship, I have to tell you. But the buffet was fantastic. And the Indian food, I've said before, my wife and I are big fans of Indian cuisine. Where we live, it's very hard to get good Indian food. On the ships, most of the chefs are from Southeast Asia, and I'm like, cook me up, because I have never had more authentic, more delicious Indian food than on board NCL. And so, so many of the ships do it well, but NCL was just a cut above. Really fantastic. And then, of course, they have the Haven. So they have the Haven restaurant for, the private dining and all that kind of stuff. But so many places to eat. And that's before you even get into the specialty dining room. Exactly. You've got Food Republic, an Asian Latin fusion place, which is great. You got Paloma, which is like a Mediterranean restaurant. You've got Teppanyaki, which is the Japanese style, and sushi.
Yes.
You've got Cagney's Steakhouse, which was fantastic. Like, it was like one of the best steakhouses I've ever been to. La Cucina
in the
Italian.
On Norwegian Spirit, because they also they do take dietary requirements very seriously.
Yeah, sure.
Which is wonderful, and also can be at times a bit of a double-edged sword, because we were traveling in our party with somebody who has a slight an intolerance to gluten, but knows how to manage it themselves. Right. So there's like a certain amount they can have, and then they can't. And we went to the Japanese restaurant, and we were looking at this menu, and trying to work out what to choose. And the service was wonderful, and the waiter she was very, very attentive. But she says to our friend, she says, pulls the menu off him and then says to him, "You can have this and this," and just points to 2 items. And he's like, "Well, actually, I was thinking today I might try." Nope. Yep. This and this.
Yeah, we don't want to have.
Brought in both.
We don't want to get into trouble with your gluten allergy.
Nope. No. Yeah. She brought in both, and then at dessert, the dessert menu came out for all of us. But instead of getting a menu, he just got a fruit platter brought out at menu time.
Interesting.
It was so funny.
The other thing is, as I said when we were discussing the Edge last week, that you could pay for speciality dining every night, because it's subsidized. It's not the same price as it would be on land.
Sure.
So La Cucina is the Italian restaurant. That's like $40 a head for a really good Italian, and Le Bistro is their French restaurant. That's about $60 a head. And then they've got a Texas smokehouse.
They've got Veuve Clicquot in there as well.
That's right. And there's a Texas smokehouse for barbecue food and smoked meats, and that's only $40 a head. And so it's not, food on land has become so expensive that to be able to pay 30, 40, 50, $60 a head for a very, high class meal, I do think is worth it. And NCL, they do these kind of specialty dining packages that are really good value, where you can actually buy a 2 or 3 or 4 dinner package that makes those prices even cheaper. So
that's good,
maybe we should talk about, because didn't we mention like in episode 2 or something, we were talking about ugly cruise ships, and we talked about the Norwegian Epic being was it the Epic that was the ugliest?
Well, actually, I mean, we did say that, but the NCL has 2 ships in their fleet that I think can fight for the ugliest
the ugly
cruise ship.
prize, which is the other one.
Because the other one's Pride of America. And
yes, that's right. The older ship, which is still going. It looks like a ferry, doesn't it? It looks like a ferry.
It's so strange, yeah. So the Pride of America was actually designed by a different company, and it was part of this project to build 2 cruise ships to operate in the Hawaiian Islands market. Not having to go, because of I think it's the Jones Act in the United States, means that if a cruise ship or a passenger ship is taking on people between US ports, it either has to be fully crewed by or majority crewed by an American crew and built in an American shipyard, or it has to go to an international port, something like that. It's maybe not word for word. But in order to do Hawaiian cruises without having to leave Hawaii, which is why there's so few cruise ships doing Hawaiian voyages, just into island voyages, they wanted to build these ships. And they actually started building the first one, Project America it was called, at a Mississippi shipyard. And then the whole thing went belly up. And NCL ended up buying the incomplete hull, having it towed to a German shipyard and completed there. But it was lengthened slightly, but sort of the same overall shape that they were planning to do. And goodness me, it is such a strange looking ship, and it has so many balconies. It's just basically like a big Lego block. And they actually had it under this subsidiary brand, NCL America, for a little while. And they managed to transfer 2 other ships. They ran 3 ships for a while, and then basically dwindled it down to just this one, which is still the only one that of a large cruise ship scale that specializes in the Hawaiian cruises. It does Hawaii to Hawaii. It doesn't have to leave the island, which is quite interesting. Quite an interesting prospect. But quite expensive, though, I think.
I think a lot of people are looking for cruises that don't leave the United States, and Hawaii is, of course, the United States. And so, it does give you certain opportunities to, if you're traveling from within the US, that you don't have to go through international customs or immigration. The world is so fragmented now that sometimes the line for immigration is so long and exhausting that you really don't want to have to do that unless it's absolutely necessary. But the other thing I wanted to talk about, because we mentioned the Norwegian Epic and the even the Joy as well, they have these huge crowns on their heads. And so whilst they might look ugly from the outside, what you're actually looking at there is like a Deck 15 observation lounge with a 180-degree panoramic view that is not specific to the haven. It is open to all guests. And as we know from other ships, and I certainly have this with Solstice class and with Millennium class, 2 ships that two classes within Celebrity, that observation, that kind of front lookout, is so fantastic. You might call it the Commodore Club if you're on Cunard.
Yeah, or the Crow's Nest from P&O.
Or the Crow's Nest from P&O. But it is a wonderful place to watch the ocean kind of come towards you. And if you get a view of the bow of the ship, it feels very nautical. You can have your Titanic moment from the comfort of an air-conditioned space.
Yeah.
And that's the great thing about NCL, is that they really have made a feature out of these observation lounges.
Yeah, yeah. I actually noticed on Spirit, so the observation lounge sits precisely on top of the bridge.
Yes.
and the footprint actually this is the most wonderful little tip. The footprint follows the bridge wings out.
Really?
So there are little seating areas that sit over the bridge wings, and you have a view forwards, to port or starboard, and aft. So you can sit there and you have that view. You know, when you do a bridge tour and you stand on the bridge wing, you look back at the ship as it's sailing through, and it's like the most remarkable view ever. This one, you can just sit there and have a drink and enjoy this view. And I sat there actually for several hours doing some YouTube editing actually on the ship and just taking it in every now and then. It was such a nice spot. But in the middle of this is the thing I found fascinating. I don't know if it's the same on the ships that you've been on, but in the middle of the observation lounge, there was actually a small stage. And in the evenings, they would have if the singers and dancers weren't doing the performances downstairs in the main show lounge, they'd come up and do like small performances in the observation lounge, which made that whole space feel so much more alive. And look, I'm not talking about big band kind of music that's going to interrupt anyone, but just singing. But it's the same people. Then you could go up and talk to them afterwards. So you got a connection with the performers, which was really nice.
And they often do bingo up there or general knowledge quizzes. And things, and on some of them they'll have a nice bar, even a long bar or a big square bar in the middle, you know, and so they're multi-use spaces, and they're kind of fantastic. I mean, we mentioned before that.
Have you seen a Prima Class?
So I haven't seen a Prima Class. Now, am I right in saying that the Viva and the Prima are the same class as Virgin Voyages ships? Would I be right in saying that? Because they look very similar. Is it just the design?
I think it's just the design. So I think the reasons why you might think that is that they've both got that sort of parabolic bow that's quite
right, and then they kind of
quite close.
They keep that. They don't seem to have any forward superstructure. Yeah,
they both have that very similar sort of appearance in the forward end of the ship, but they are distinct. They are distinct classes, and internally they're very, very different.
Yeah.
I actually had the opportunity, though I wasn't able to take it up, to do a media tour on a Prima Class ship, and I was watching through YouTube all of my fellow vloggers and YouTubers having the most remarkable experience. Emma Cruises actually was there, and she did this fantastic video. But you know, I think they're building yet another one, Norwegian Luna. So there's a big fleet of these being constructed at the moment.
And again, they're a bit Marmite, aren't they? You know, people love them and people hate them.
They've taken the advice from so many people who are passionate about cruising, and the design, at least. I mean, obviously, full disclosure, I haven't been on board, so I don't know from firsthand, but the design has a lot more access to the outdoors, a lot more access for the outdoors to be brought in. So there's sort of more seating areas, there's larger windows. I think there's a glass area in the center of the ship that allows for you to have that view of the ocean. Very, very busy looking ships on the outside. The hull art that Norwegian pioneered actually back in the day, it has gone crazy. It's all over the forward superstructure of the ship. The whole thing's painted up. Must be an absolute nightmare to maintain. I mean, can you imagine they painting it and having to do all the different colors to keep it looking tidy? But I think that the whole concept around the Prima and the Prima Plus class was to really start to bring those elements together a bit more. There's infinity pools, for example, where you can sit and look over the side. The whole entertainment area has been brought right up by the funnel, so it kind of opens up the forward end of the ship a little bit more for a bit quieter activities. Because we should also mention that NCL is among the cruise brands that have gone full into having these adventure activities on board. Now, Norwegian Spirit didn't have anything like that. The most adventurous thing you could do on board is play some basketball. But she's an older design, that's fine. But these new ships, the Prima Class particularly, they've got speedways on them. They've got the drop, which is this dry slide where you almost go vertically down the side.
Terrifying.
It sounds horrendous. I know.
It just drops out. And the weird thing is it passes like 3 people's balconies on the way down. So
every morning they get woken up like...
It reminded me of like in the old like post offices where they would send information, or you know, banks and offices send information through a kind of vacuum system to send messages. I have a story about the Speedway. I think you know that I'm about to tell this story because it is very important. The Speedway is, of course, the go-kart track. It's like electric go-karts that are built onto the back of a lot of these breakaway ships. And our experience was sadly not a good one. Now, we had a fantastic cruise on the Norwegian Bliss. Amazing food. The entertainment was great. They had Jersey Boys, the musical that was on, slightly cut down version of the Broadway show. And so many of these ships now have cut down Broadway shows on board.
Yeah.
And so we'd had a really good cruise. Like, literally, we couldn't fault it. But sadly, our booking for the Speedway was on the penultimate night. It might have been the last night, actually. And the ship had stopped in, I think, Ensenada, Mexico, which is kind of famous for people getting off and getting a little bit drunk. And so a lot of people had got off and got drunk. And so we were in line for the Speedway, and the people that were behind us or in front of us, I forget, they were undoubtedly the worse for wear. They were young, they'd been out, they were very rowdy, very noisy. There were signs that said if you're intoxicated, you cannot drive these cars. Of course you can't.
Yeah.
And so we, I remember kind of looking at my wife thinking, well, they're just not going to let these people on. It's going to be fine, And so that's right, they were behind us. So we got on, and I was kind of hoping that they weren't, but we didn't want to say anything because there wasn't really anybody to tell. There was like one person running the line. They were definitely short-staffed. And so we get on the Speedway. You have to wear the helmet. They give you a little bit of instruction, and zoom, off you go. I mean, they are fast on the back of a moving cruise ship where you're kind of going round and around, and it's on multiple levels, and they tell you have to stay to the right. I'm driving along, making, I'm not a crazy driver, I'm past those years, so I'm like poodling along quite nicely on the right-hand side, and someone from behind me, boom, whizzes up, and they rammed into the back of me and caused my neck to have like a proper whiplash, and I felt my whole rib cage like contract, and my back, because the seat is so hard, of course, and so it's not cushioned in any way. And so I felt my back and my spine compress. And I was like, and I stopped, had to stop the vehicle. And I was like, oh no. And this guy, after he'd rammed me, because you're not supposed to, it's not like bumper cars or Dodgers. No. After he'd rammed me, he then turned and then sped off ahead of me towards my wife, who was up ahead. And obviously one of the people working on the Speedway ran towards me and was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, I was traumatized, so I didn't really know if I was okay. So I just drove to the end, and I just got out. I wanted it to be over. But then I heard him speed up and bang into my wife's car as well. We were both whiplashed and really uncomfortable. Now, we also had dinner reservations for like half an hour later. So we went to the medical center first, and we reported it and everything, and we were treated like the perpetrators rather than the victims. I just remember feeling really weird about the way they handled it. And they ended up like taking photographs of my shoes. They wanted to take photos of my shoes. It was so weird. And they made us go back to the cabin, and they wanted to, because I changed for dinner, and they wanted to see the shoes that I was wearing and take photos, but they didn't tell us why. I've had car crashes before in the real world, and sometimes the pain takes a few days to really present itself. You're in such shock when it happens that your adrenaline kicks in and you can't really feel the injuries at first. So we had to give statements, and it just took forever, and nobody was really on our team. I really felt like we tried to explain, there was CCTV footage, everything was filmed. And so we explained that these drunk people were on behind us, and they probably shouldn't have been let on, and they were driving really badly. And then we went for dinner. We had a specialty dining booked in this lovely restaurant at the back of the ship, and the security officer comes and interrupts our dinner to take another statement. And it was a police officer had shown up, and everyone's looking at us. It was really embarrassing. Anyway, long story short, we were injured. We wrote to the cruise line, and their response was very unsatisfactory. I think they offered us 10% off a future cruise. But all I wanted to do was get the CCTV footage, which they promised and they never showed us. And I wanted an apology. I wanted them to take accountability, and they refused. And so what it made me realize is that when things go right on a cruise ship, that is great. You know, there is there's no problem. But when something goes wrong and you're in international waters and you're at the mercy of the security staff and just the facilities that you have on board, in hindsight, I should have insisted to see the captain, because I really feel like the captain probably would have been the only person that I could have, you know, had them understand and want to take some responsibility. But I feel very sad about that, and I've written multiple times to the NCL line to get some, it's not even compensation, it's just an acknowledgement. And even now I feel like I'm being stonewalled as a paying passenger, trying to get some empathy and understanding for what we went through. And it took us a few weeks to recover, you know. It was tough. So that really kind of ruined.
Not the greatest way to end your trip.
It was not the greatest way. And thank God it was on the last night as opposed to the second or third night. These gimmicks for getting people on ships that are increasingly daredevil are completely unnecessary, and they are just too risky. I'm still willing to kind of, you know, and open to hear back from them and have a conversation, because I just wanted to sit down with them and view the footage and just, you know, make sure that this didn't happen again to anybody else, because we were lucky. And I'm grateful for you listening, because I don't feel like anybody else really has. And it would be interesting for people in the comments down below to write some experiences that they might have had at sea that weren't as, you know, traditional and could have been issues. And if you missed the first 4 episodes, please go back and catch up and share and leave comments, as you're so good at, and we'll be back next week.
So many nice comments so far. It's been great.
Really great. And we'll, as I say, we'll address any questions we'll address in the episodes going forward. So don't forget to put those down. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, The Expert Cruise Show, and just spread the word, because, you know, it's a whole new movement, and we're very grateful for your company. All right, see you next week.
Thank you.